Hi, my name is Timothy Ferrantino, and for this presentation, I will be going over the ethical dilemmas of The Truman Show. Okay, now for the presentation, I'll first go over the synopsis of the movie, then I'll move on to the reason for why I chose this movie for the project. Then I'll go on to the parties that I'll focus on for the ethical dilemmas. Then I'll move on to the ethical dilemmas that were posed in the movie. Then I will go on to the movie's personal impact on me, and then I'll conclude the presentation. So for the synopsis of the movie, The Truman Show is an actual television show that was created by executive producer Christof. He wanted a television show that would appeal to millions of people all around the world. He wanted to do something that was never done before in television history. He posed the idea of recording an entire person's life, from their time as a baby to adulthood. The company Omnicom thus decided to adopt a child named Truman Burbank from one of the local cities in Seaside, Florida. The company had the company then began to systematically build a set that was big enough to house an entire city. The city would be populated with thousands of paid actors who would put on a facade for Truman. The city even had its own night and day cycle. Truman would be the only person who didn't know the city was actually a fake set. He would go about his entire life believing that he was actually living a normal life. With nearly 5,000 cameras throughout the city, he would be recorded throughout his entire day. The entire world was able to witness his first steps, his first childhood crush, his high school prom, and even his wedding. Truman even had to experience the death of his father when he was a young boy because the directors wanted to induce a traumatic event that would stop him from wanting to travel away from the city. Throughout his life, numerous people have tried to get his attention that he was being watched by millions of people. Many failed, but one person succeeded in telling him the truth. Her name was Lauren, who was his high school crush. She wanted to desperately tell him that everything in the city was fabricated and made up, but the directors ordered the security guards to catch her and stop her. So she ended up failing. Truman was still young and confused by this event, and eventually married another woman chosen by the directors. It was until one day when he saw his dad, who was homeless, was when he began to realize that something was terribly wrong. Connecting these past two events, he began testing out Lauren's theory. He knew people were following a set schedule every week, and he noticed how he was nearly untouchable no matter what crimes he committed. People he never met even knew who he was. Christoph decided, Christoph, the executive producer, decided to bring the father back onto the show to end Truman's fascination with the truth, which it did momentarily. Unbeknown to him, Truman created a plan to leave the set. During the night, Truman escaped onto a boat to reach the end of the set. Christoph was attempting to thwart his plan by making the weather dangerous around him. He failed, and Truman was able to reach the end of the set. Christoph gave a last-ditched effort to make him stay by saying how his world was a paradise created for him, but Truman was tired of living in a fabricated world, and thus he escaped the set forever. The reason I chose this movie was mainly due to the fact of the amazing performance of the actors. Jim Carrey gave such an electric and emotional performance throughout the movie. He played a very sympathetic character. Due to the age that we live in, I feel like I can relate to the premise of the movie more because of how everything we do is recorded and posted on social media. I greatly enjoyed the variety of themes and issues that the movie proposed, such as living in a utopia and also questioning whether the American dream was true or not, and the power that social media has over society. And I will touch upon these themes later on in the presentation. So the main party that I'll focus on will be on Christoph, who was a executive producer of the show, who worked alongside a company called Omnicom, and the main actor of the show, Truman Burbank. So for my ethical dilemmas, um, one of them is, does a company have the right to adopt a human being? My second one was, can a television company broadcast your life without your consent? And my third dilemma was, can a television company force its actors to undergo duress that they did not consent to? So for my first ethical dilemma, does a company have the right to adopt a human being? I say I say no corporation should be allowed to adopt another individual. Um, Based on the background, Christoph was driven to adopt Truman to create one of the greatest television shows ever made. In certain aspects of the law, companies can be treated as people, but in terms of adoption, it is clear that Florida's adoption laws state that only single adults or married couples may jointly adopt in the Sunshine State. Um, the company was clearly treating Truman like a piece of property and not like a human being, with no real sense of autonomy in the show. One can argue that Christoph may have personally adopted him, giving him the ability to bring Truman under his television show. This happens many times when parents allow movies and TV shows to film their children in roles. This may be the case, and throughout the movie, Christoph attempts to blur the lines between fantasy and reality, which allows him to circumvent many laws in the US. But Truman was a minor under 16 years of age and on the television set. In Florida, he is only allowed to work for 3 hours per school day, or up to 15 hours can be worked in the school week. Truman is clearly working at least for 16 hours per day. Thus, the show wouldn't even be allowed to stream 24/7 due to these restrictions. For my second ethical dilemma, can a reality TV show company broadcast your life without your consent? Um, a company should not be allowed to film its actors without their explicit consent. Age plays a huge factor determining consent for entertainment in Florida. Assuming that Christoph adopted him for the television show, Florida laws would allow a child to perform in the entertainment industry if the parent signs a consent form along with a work permit to Florida's Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Thus, in this case, a parent can legally waive the consent of the child to be on a reality TV show. But once the child becomes the age of 16, the child will now have to sign their own consent forms as well. And clearly, Truman was never given any forms at this age whatsoever. But besides the age of the individual, the production showed Truman's life uncensored. The show's creator violated Truman's Fourth Amendment. There was many times when he had a reasonable expectation of privacy, but the director willfully broadcasted these events. Truman can fine the corporation in a civil lawsuit based on these above facts alone. In Katz v. US, the court stated that what a person knowingly exposes to the public, even in his own home or office, is not a subject of Fourth Amendment protection. But when he seeks to preserve a private, even in an area accessible to the public, may be constitutionally protected. Truman cannot even enact his own basic constitutional rights because he believes that no one is recording him in the privacy of his own home. Knowing he was being watched, Truman began to have a mental breakdown on the set, which will lead me on to my next slide. Can a television show company force its actors to undergo duress that they did not consent to? No, the company cannot put its actors through harm that they did not consent to. It is the responsibility of the company to ensure the health and well-being of its actors. Throughout the movie, Truman began to undergo a mental breakdown, knowing that he may actually be living in a fake reality. Truman should have been provided support with the help of qualified medical professionals on the set, but he wasn't. Omnicom committed several crimes against Truman, not including the ones that I already spoke about. The company nearly murdered him while traveling on a boat, once with his father and another time when he tried to escape the set. The company committed the crime of unlawful restraint. Christoph illegally deprived Truman of his physical freedom. He was trapped on a set, and even all the actors played a role in keeping him there. The education that Truman was provided now comes into question. Truman was an insurance adjuster in the show. Was he given a proper education or exam to actually become one? Was his school accredited? If not, then Truman can sue the degree program for lying about their accreditation. One can only have sympathy for Truman as he was forced to undergo so much trauma for the sake of television views. Now I'll talk about the personal impact that the movie had on me. It is quite clear that I cannot relate to Truman, as the events that he undergoes is quite unique to his life, but the movie had such a great impact on me that I felt the movie throughout the whole movie, um, it posed the question of the authenticity of social media. We live in a technological advanced age that has been increasingly difficult to differentiate what is genuine and what is a mere fabrication created for the consumption of the viewer. People have a tendency to post their accomplishments and awards on social media platforms. They even edit and alter content to create an ideal version of themselves. We tend to not want to share our mistakes and faults with others, as this would make people look down upon us. The movie made me more aware that posts on social media are not always what they seem to be, and that I should be myself and not conform to the standards that society cherishes. I really like this quote by Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology. Um, in his 1928 essay, The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, he wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual, consciousness, and society. Fittingly enough, a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon the others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual." Now for the conclusion for my presentation. To wrap up the presentation, Truman was adopted by Omnicom to fulfill the desires and plans that Christoph had created. He wanted to create the first television show that recorded the birth and death of an actor on live television. He wanted to create a perfect world for Truman by stripping him of all his personal freedoms. But Christoph failed to take into account Truman's human nature. It is in human nature to seek out the truth above all else. People are not meant to be locked within a movie set, but are meant to be set free to do the goals that they want to achieve. Christoph put Truman in the middle of numerous ethical dilemmas, where Truman in the end was able to counter the lies that Christoph was feeding him on the show. Not wanting to make the last episode on the show unique, he ended the show by saying a trivial line that he used on a daily basis. His final line was, "Good morning, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night." He then left the set and escaped Christoph forever. Thank you for listening, and that concludes the end of my presentation.